Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I'm here to bring you a battle between the Zendikar Rising Commander decks and the Face the Hydra Challenge deck from Theros. We'll be playing two games, first on normal difficulty and then on hard mode, using commander rules, so you'll be able to summon their respective commanders from the command zone. And for these games, we'll be using two hero cards. We have the Harvester, which says tap, draw a card, then discard a card, and the Warrior, which says tap, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. Because I only have one copy of each of these cards, we'll apply them to both decks simultaneously. We'll get started by drawing our opening hands. Anowon draws a Merfolk Robber, Zulaport Cutthroat, Open into Wonder, Island, Stolen Identity, Heirloom Blade, and Fact or Fiction. One land is not a keeper, and so we will mulligan this. Now they have an Island, Commander Sphere, Swamp, Murder, Mindstone, Island, and Island. There is no real action here, but I think I'm still going to keep this because I can sack and redraw and hopefully loot into something. And because this is multiplayer, we will be able to keep this as a free mulligan. Obuun draws a Ground Assault, Rites of Flourishing, Forest, Spore Mound, Circuitous Route, and Blighted Woodland. This is also pretty low on action, but I guess we can keep this because we at least have spells to cast, as bad as they might be. We'll go ahead and get started. Anowon will play an Island, Obuun will play a Forest, and then we'll pass to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card. This is a Snapping Fang head. It's a 0/8 elite head. At the beginning of the Hydra's end step, it deals 1 damage to each player, and when it leaves the battlefield, each player gains 4 life and draws a card. We'll be taking 6 damage from the assembled heads to go down to 34 each. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Swamp, and we will discard an Island. Obuun draws a Naya Charm, and we will discard the Ground Assault. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Swamp. Obuun will draw a Selesnya Sanctuary. Anowon will play the Swamp. We'll tap both of these and cast the Mind Stone. This is an artifact. You can tap it for colorless. Pay 1, tap, and sack it to draw a card. Obuun will play another Forest. And then we don't have anything else to do, and so we will pass the turn. The Hydra will cast the topmost card. This is a Noxious Hydra Breath. You can choose to either deal 5 damage to each player or destroy each tapped non-head creature. We'll choose to destroy each tapped non-head creature. Then we'll take another 6 damage from the heads to go down to 28 each. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws an Endless Obedience, and we will discard the Endless Obedience. Obuun draws a Roiling Regrowth, and we will discard the Naya Charm. Then we'll untap. Anowon draws an Island. Obuun draws a Harrow. Obuun will play a Blighted Woodland, and then we will tap all 3 of these. Cast the Rite of Flourishing. This is an enchantment. It says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, and each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. And so we will play an additional land. We will play the Selesnya Sanctuary. This is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. You can tap it for green and white. We'll bounce this Forest back into our hand. And then Anowon can now play a second land, and so we'll play a Swamp over here. And then with our 4 mana, we'll tap out, and we will cast Anowon the Ruin Thief. This is a 2/4 legendary vampire rogue. Other rogues you control get +1/+1. Whenever 1 or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If that player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. And then we will pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card. This is a Ravenous Brute head. It's a 0/6 elite head, and when it leaves the battlefield, each player gains 2 life and draws a card. We are now going to be taking 8 damage, going down to 20. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Swamp, and we will discard a Swamp. Obuun draws a Seer's Sundial, and we will discard a Harrow. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Swamp. Obuun will draw a Together Forever. Anowon will play a Swamp and an Island. Obuun will tap 4 mana and cast Circuitous Route. This is a sorcery. It says search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or gate cards. Put them onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle your library. We'll take the Gruul Guildgate. This is a gate. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for red or green. We'll also grab the Selesnya Guildgate. This is also a gate. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for green or white. We'll shuffle. Anowon will spend 3 mana and cast Murder. This is an instant. It says destroy target creature. We'll target the Snapping Fanghead. This will die. We'll both gain 4 life to go up to 24 each. We'll reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. No new heads, and then we will each draw a card. Anowon draws a Submerged Boneyard, and Obuun draws a Needle Spires. Obuun will play the Needle Spires. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for red or white, and you can pay 2 red and white to make it a 2/1 red and white elemental creature with double strike until end of turn. It's still a land. Then we'll play the Forest as well. We should have also drawn an extra card each off of the rights, and so Anowon will draw a Stolen Identity, and Obuun will draw a Sandstone Oracle. Anowon will tap 3, and will play the Commander Sphere. This is an artifact. You can tap it for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. You can sacrifice it to draw a card. And it looks like that's all we can do. We'll pass the turn to the Hydra. It'll cast the topmost card, which is Nectangle. If there are 5 or more heads on the battlefield, tap 2 of them and they don't untap during the Hydra's next untap step. Otherwise, reveal the top card of the Hydra's library and the Hydra casts that card. There are 4, so we'll go ahead and reveal this. This is a Savage Figurehead. It's a 0/8 elite head. At the beginning of the Hydra's end step, reveal the top card of the Hydra's library and the Hydra casts that card. When it leaves the battlefield, each player gains 4 life and draws a card. We're going to the end step, so we'll cast 1 more of these cards. This is Disorienting Glower. Players can't cast spells until the Hydra's next turn. We'll put this here to remind us not to be able to cast spells, and then we will take 7 damage each to go down to 17. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Command Tower, and we will discard a Swamp. Obuun draws a Plains, and we will discard the Roiling Regrowth. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Dismal Backwater and a Rogue's Passage. Obuun will draw a Forest and a Scare Tiller. Cannot cast spells this turn, but we can play lands, so we will. Anowon will play the Dismal Backwater. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. You can tap it for blue or black. Anowon will gain a life to go up to 18. We'll also play the Submerged Boneyard. This is a land. It enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap for blue or black. Obuun will play the Plains and the Forest. Obuun will tap the Gruul Guildgate for red, Plains for white, and then 2 forests to activate the Needle Spires. This is now a 2/1 red and white elemental creature with double strike. And then we will go to combat, and then we will attack the Ravenous Brute Head with both of these. That'll deal 6 damage to the Brute Head because of the double strike, and then it will die. We'll gain 2 life apiece, taking Anowon up to 20 and Obuun up to 19. We'll reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. And then we'll draw a card each. Anowon will draw a Scythe Claw, and Obuun will draw a Mountain. And then Anowon's ability triggers, and so the Hydra will mill 2. Because it milled a creature, Anowon will draw a card. We drew a swamp, and then we'll pass to the Hydra. The Hydra will play the topmost card. This is a Disorienting Glower. Keep this one here to remind us that we can't cast any more spells. We'll cast another spell off the Savage Figurehead, which is another Disorienting Glower. We'll keep this here to know that we can't cast any more spells. We'll take 5 damage apiece to go down to 15 and 14. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon will draw a swamp, and we will discard the swamp. Obuun will draw an Emeria Angel, and we will discard the Scare Tiller. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Night Howler and a Jwar Isle Refuge. Obuun will draw a Retreat to Emeria and a Tuskguard Captain. We cannot cast any spells, but we can play lands, so we will continue to do so. Anowon will play the Jwar Isle Refuge. This is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Anowon will go up to 16. And then Anowon will play the Command Tower. This is a land. You can tap it for 1 mana of any color, and your commander's color identity. Obuun will play a mountain. As before, we'll tap to activate the Needle Spire. And then we cannot defeat the Savage Figurehead, so we will send Anowon at 1 Hydra head and the Needle Spire at another Hydra head. One of the Hydra heads will die, and we'll gain 2 life each to go up to 18 and 16. We'll reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. And then we'll mill 2 off of Anowon's ability. We did mill a creature, so we'll draw a card. Anowon draws a Dimir Aqueduct. And then we can cast nothing, and so we will pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is a Hydra's Impenetrable Hide. Each head gains indestructible until the end of the Hydra's next turn. And then we will also cast another one off of the Savage Figurehead, which is Distract the Hydra. Each player may sacrifice a creature. Each player who sacrificed a creature this way chooses a head and taps it. Each player who didn't sacrifice a creature loses 3 life. We'll choose to lose 3 life on top of taking another 4 to go take 7, taking Anowon down to 11 and Obuun down to 9. And then in turn we'll use the Harvester. Anowon will draw a Soul Ring, and we will discard a Swamp. Anowon will draw a Satyr Wayfinder, and we will discard the Satyr Wayfinder. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Factor Fiction and a Sepulchral Primordial. Obuun draws a Plains and a Spring Bloom Druid. We cannot kill any of these Hydras this turn, so we will just have to cast some spells. We'll play some lands. Anowon will tap the Mind Stone and cast a Soul Ring. This is an artifact. You can tap it for 2 colorless. Obuun will tap 4 mana and cast themselves. This is a 3/3 Legendary Elf Spirit. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until the end of the turn. Where X is Obuun's power, it's still a land, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Then we will tap 5 mana over here and play the Spore Mound. This is a 3/3 fungus, and when a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green sapling creature token. We'll play a Plains over here. That will trigger Obuun. We'll put a counter on Obuun, and we'll get a sapling. Anowon will tap 4 mana and cast the Night Howler. This is a 0/0 enchantment horror with bestow 2 black. It and the enchanted creature get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures in all graveyards. And we'll enchant Anowon with this. There are 7 creatures in the graveyard, so we'll use this counter to track the number of creatures in the graveyard. Anowon will then play a Dimir Aqueduct. This is a land that enters the battlefield tap. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. We will bounce the island back into our hand. We'll replay the island, and then we'll tap 5 mana and cast the Scythe Claw. This is an equipment with living weapon. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life, rounded up. And then, because we can't do any damage, we will pass the turn. We'll turn this into a 4/4, and then it'll turn back. We'll go to the Hydra's turn. The Hydra casts a Hydra head. Then it'll cast the Ravenous Brute head. We'll take 7 damage each, going to 4 and 2. At the end of the turn, Anowon will tap 4 mana and cast Fact or Fiction. This is an instant. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Because we control all of the Hydra's actions, we'll go ahead and just put all of these into our hand. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws an island, and we'll discard the island. Obuun draws a command tower, and we will discard the Sandstone Oracle. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Swamp and a Soul Manipulation. Obuun will draw a Crush Contraband and a Waker of the Wilds. Anowon will play an island and a swamp. Obuun will tap 4 mana and cast Retreat to Emeria. This is an enchantment, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can create a 1/1 white core ally creature token, or creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. We'll tap 4 more mana and cast Emeria Angel. This is a 3/3 angel with flying, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. Then we'll play the Command Tower. A land enter the battlefield under our control. We'll put a counter on Obuun. We'll create a bird and a sapperling and a core. The Oracle will increase this to 8. Anowon will tap an island and cast a Merfolk Windrobber. This is a 1/1 Merfolk Rogue with flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card, and you can sacrifice it to draw a card, but activate this ability only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. We will go to combat. This will turn the Selesnya Sanctuary into a 5/5. We'll also tap to give the Angel and the Windrobber haste, and we will swing Anowon into the Savage Vigorhead. We'll swing the land and the old Sapperling token into the Ravaging Brute head. We will attack the Hydra head with the Angel, another Hydra head with the Spore Mound, and the final Hydra head with Obuun. This should wipe the entire board. We'll reveal 10 cards to see if there are any new heads. There are 3 Hydra heads. We'll gain 12 life apiece to go up to 16 and 14. We'll draw 2 cards each. Anowon draws a Swamp and an Island. Obuun will draw a Naya Panorama and a Beanstalk Giant. Obuun will play the Naya Panorama. This is a land. You can tap it for colorless. You can pay 1 and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic Mountain Forest or Plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This will trigger and give Obuun another counter. We'll create another Sapperling, Core, and Bird. We're going to have tokens, so we'll use this to count as the other core. Anowon has too many cards, and so we will just discard down to hand size. And then we'll go to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card. This is a Noxious Hydra Breath. We will choose to deal 5 to each player. We'll go taking 8 each to go down to 8 and 6. Then at the end of the turn, we will use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Swamp, and we will discard the Swamp. Obuun draws a Forest, and we will discard the Together Forever. We'll untap. I also realized that we should have milled 10 off of Anowon's hit. Because there was a creature there, we should have drawn a card. And then we will have discarded a card. Anowon will draw a Una's Blackguard and a Marang River Prowler. Obuun will draw a Plains and a Omnath Locus of Rage. Right now, I think we just try to kill our opponent. So we will attack with Anowon, the Ruined Sage. We'll go to combat. We'll turn one of these lands into a 8/8 and attack with that. And then we will attack with, I don't know, 2 Saplings and a Core. This will defeat these. This should be at 18. And then we'll reveal 6 cards to see if there are any new heads. So Brute Head and the Hydra Head. And then we'll mill 18. We'll draw a card off that being milled. We'll also gain 6 life each to go up to 14 and 12. And then there are 2 more creatures left. We'll just finish them off real fast by spending 9 mana and casting in Garruk's Wake. This is a sorcery. It says destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. That'll destroy these as well as everything on Obuun's side, but that doesn't matter because destroying the last Hydra head causes the commander decks to defeat the Hydra, and we will be back for game 2. We are back for hard mode with 4 Hydra heads assembled. We'll go ahead and draw our opening hands. Anowon draws a Night Howler, Swamp, Distant Melody, Sepulchral Primordial, Swamp, Mindstone, and Stolen Identity. This is not ideal because there's not really a whole lot to do here, and so we will mulligan. Then we have a Arcane Signet, Whisper Steel Dagger, Silumgar's Command, Swamp, Endless Obedience, Sepulchral Primordial, and Swamp. This is not a great hand, but at least the Arcane Signet means that we'll have 1 more color, so we'll keep this one. Obuun draws a Forest, Boros Garrison, Croson Verge, Mountain, Retreat to Kazandu, Sylvan Advocate, and Forest. It is not an ideal hand, but it is one that we can keep. We'll go ahead and get started. Anowon will play a Swamp. Obuun will play the Croson Verge. This is a land, enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for colorless, or pay 2 and sacrifice it to search your library for a Forest and a Plains and put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle your library. It'll enter the battlefield tapped, and then we will go to the Hydra. They will cast the topmost card, which is a Hydra head. We'll take 5 damage each, going to 35 each. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon will draw a Commander Sphere, and we will discard the Sepulchral Primordial. Obuun will draw a Multani, and we will discard a Forest. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Lazav Dimir Mastermind, and Obuun draws a Condemn. Anowon will play the Swamp. We'll tap both of these and cast the Arcane Signet. This is an artifact. You can tap it for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Obuun will play a Forest. We'll tap both of these and play the Sylvan Advocate. This is a 2/3 Elf Druid ally with Vigilance, and as long as you control 6 or more lands, Sylvan Advocate and land creatures you control get +2/+2. We can't really profitably attack right now, and so we will hold. We'll go to the Hydra's turn. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Disorienting Glow. We'll take 5 each to go down to 30 each. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon will draw a Soaring Thought Thief, and then we will discard the Endless Obedience. Obuun will draw a Elvish Rejuvenator, and we will discard the Condemn. We'll untap. Anowon will draw a Scythe Claw. Obuun will draw a Return of the Wild Speaker. We cannot cast spells this turn, unfortunately, so we will just play a land each. Obuun will play a Mountain. Anowon can't even play a land, and so Anowon must pass the turn. We cannot kill anything, so we'll just pass the turn. The Hydra casts a Groan from the Stump. Put exactly 2 cards named Hydra Head onto the battlefield from the Hydra's graveyard. If you can't reveal cards from the top of the Hydra's library until you reveal a head card, put that card onto the battlefield and the rest into the Hydra's graveyard. There is a Savage Vigor head. This will cause another spell to be cast. This is a Torn Between Heads. Tap 2 heads. They don't untap during the Hydra's next untap step. Torn Between Heads deals 5 damage to each player. We'll tap one of the heads and the Savage Vigor head. And so we'll take 5 damage each, going to 25 each, plus another 4 damage to go down to 21 each. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Gaunty Lord of Luxury. And we will discard the Scytheclaw. Obuun draws a Harrow. We will discard the Return of the Wildspeaker. One tap. Anowon draws a Marsh Flitter. And Obuun draws a Forest. Anowon is not in a great place right now because they can't cast very much. So we'll have to tap these 3 and cast the Commander Sphere to see if we can get somewhere. Obuun, on the other hand, can cast some stuff. We'll tap 3 mana and cast Retreat to Xandu. This is an enchantment. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you gain 2 life. We'll play the Boros Garrison. So land enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. You can tap it for red and white. We'll bounce the mountain back into our hand. Because a land enters the battlefield, we'll put a counter on the Sylvan Advocate. And then we'll go to combat and we'll swing with the Advocate into one of the Hydra heads. We'll gain 2 life to go up to 23 each. We'll reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. And then we'll pass to the Hydra. The Hydra will play a Hydra head. We'll cast another card off the Savage Vigor head, which is a Ravenous Brute head. We'll take 6 damage to go down to 17 each. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Swamp. And we will discard Lazav. Obuun will draw a Scare Tiller. And we will discard Scare Tiller. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Dimir Locket. And Obuun will draw a Cryptic Caves. Anowon will tap these 3 to cast a Dimir Locket. This is an artifact. You can tap it for blue or black. And you can pay Hybrid Dimir times 4 and tap it and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. We'll also play a Swamp. And then we'll tap these 2 to play a Soaring Thought Thief. This is a 1/3 human rogue with flash and flying. And as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues you control get +1/+0. Whenever 1 or more rogues you control attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. Over here, we'll tap these 4 and finally cast Obuun. And then we will play a Forest. This will trigger Obuun as well as the Retreat, getting him 2 counters. We'll go to combat and we'll use the Warrior to give the Soaring Thought Thief haste. And we'll turn this Forest into a 5/5. We'll swing the Advocate and the 5/5 into the Snapping Fang head. We'll swing Obuun and the Soaring Thought Thief into the Ravenous Brute head. That will defeat these 2. We'll reveal 4 cards to see if there are any new Hydra heads. 2 more Hydra heads. Rogues are now +1/+0. We'll also gain 6 life to go to 23 each and draw 2 cards each. Anowon will draw a Price of Fame and a In Garruk's Wake. Obuun will draw a Inspiring Call and a Fertilid. That is going to be the end of that. The forest will turn to being a forest. We'll go to the Hydra's turn. The Hydra will untap and then cast a topmost card, which is Disorienting Glower. Players can't cast spells until the Hydra's next turn. And then we will take 7 damage each to go to 16. Then we'll use the Harvester. Anowon will draw a Latchkey Fairy. And we will discard the Whisper Steel Dagger. Obuun will draw a Trove Warden. And we will discard an Inspiring Call. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Dismal Backwater. Obuun will draw a Struggle to Survive. We cannot cast spells again, but Anowon will play the Dismal Backwater. We'll gain a life to go up to 17. Obuun will play a mountain. This will trigger the retreat and Obuun to get 2 more counters on here. Since we can't cast spells this turn, we will just go to combat, turning the forest into a 7/7, and then we'll attack with Obuun, the Sylvan Advocate, and the 7/7 into 3 of the Hydra heads. They will perish. We'll reveal 4 cards to see if there are any new heads. And then we will each gain 4 life to go up to 21 and 20 respectively. Since we can't cast anything, we'll go to the Hydra's turn. The Hydra will cast the topmost card. This is a Distract the Hydra. I think it is acceptable to lose 3 life here, and so we will go take 8 apiece to go down to 13 and 12. Now we are freed from the Disorienting Glower, so we'll cast some spells on the Hydra's end step, and then we'll tap 5 and cast Selamgar Command. This is an instant. It says choose 2, counter target non-creature spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, and target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. We'll get rid of 2 of these. We'll reveal 4 cards to see if there are any new heads. There's 1 new head. We'll gain 4 life apiece to go up to 17 and 16. And then Obuun will tap 2 mana and crack the Crows and Verge to get a Forest and a Plains. We'll put these 2 counters on the Sylvan Advocate. We'll use the Harvester. Anowon draws a Fated Return. And we'll discard the Price of Fame. Obuun draws a Sylvan Reclamation, and we'll discard that. We'll untap. Anowon draws a Merfolk Windrobber, and Obuun will draw a Evolving Wilds. Anowon will spend 4 mana and recast Anowon. We'll also spend another mana and cast the Merfolk Windrobber. Obuun will spend 6 mana and cast Multani Yavimaya Avatar. This is a 0/0 legendary elemental avatar with reach and trample. It gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land card in your graveyard. You can pay 1 and a green to return 2 land cards you control to their owner's hand and return Multani from their graveyard to your hand. Multani is an 8/8. We'll tap the warrior to give Multani and Anowon haste, and we will go to combat. We'll swing with the Soaring Thought Thief and Anowon into 2 of these, and the Sylvan Advocate and Multani into the other 2. This will trigger the Soaring Thought Thief, and the Hydra will mill 2. This will defeat all 4 heads, and we will look at the next 8 cards to see if there are any new heads. There are no new heads, so the rest doesn't matter. And the Zendikar Rising commander decks defeat the Horde. These were long games. As you can see, just because you have 40 life doesn't mean that these commander decks are going to have an easy time against the Hydra. Let me know what you thought about the games in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.